There's a moment that catches a lot of people off guard. It's late, or maybe it's early. You hear a knock at the door, and when you look outside, it's the police. Then one of them says something vague and unsettling. "We got a call about you." That single sentence makes people panic, and panic makes people talk. They start explaining. They start defending themselves. They start inviting officers into a situation that was still outside the door just a few seconds earlier. But if you remember, one line in that moment, make it this: "I'm not answering questions without a lawyer." Not yelled, not argued, just said clearly, calmly, and respectfully. Because when officers show up with a vague line like "we got a call about you," the biggest mistake most people make is assuming they can talk their way out of whatever this is, before they even understand what this is, and that mistake can change the entire encounter. Imagine a man named Daniel. He's home alone on a Thursday night, half finished with dinner, phone on the kitchen counter, TV running in the background. Nothing dramatic, nothing unusual. Then there's a firm knock at the door. He checks the window and sees two officers standing on the porch. That alone is enough to make your heart jump. Daniel opens the inner door but leaves the storm door closed. One officer gives him the line that instantly raises his stress level. "Sir, we got a call about you. We need to talk." Now pause right there, because this is where the whole encounter can go one of two very different ways. In one version, Daniel does what a lot of decent, innocent people do. He starts talking fast. "About me? Who called? I didn't do anything. I've been home all night. Well, I did go out earlier, but only for gas. Is this about my neighbor? We had a disagreement last week, but it wasn't serious." He thinks he's helping himself. He thinks that if he sounds cooperative enough, the officers will realize they've got the wrong guy and leave. But what he's really doing is handing over information before he knows why they're there, what was reported, whether he's just a witness, whether someone made a false complaint, whether they're fishing for consent, or whether they're trying to turn a vague report into a real investigation. That's why the safer move is often much simpler. Daniel takes a breath and says, "Officer, I'm not answering questions without a lawyer." That sentence feels uncomfortable to a lot of people because they worry it sounds guilty. But in real life, it often does something much more important than making you sound smart. It slows the situation down. It stops nervous rambling. It creates a clear boundary before you accidentally walk yourself into trouble. And that matters because not every police contact starts with a clear accusation. Sometimes it's a welfare check. Sometimes it's a neighbor complaint. Sometimes it's a noise report, a mistaken identity issue, a domestic disturbance call tied to the wrong address, or an anonymous tip with almost no detail. Sometimes officers really are just following up on something they were told. But sometimes vague language is also used because officers want to see what you'll volunteer on your own. That's where people get trapped by their own instinct to explain. If you've never thought about this before, here's the key idea. When police come to your home without a warrant and start asking questions, that can be a very different kind of encounter from a lawful forced entry or an arrest. A lot depends on the exact facts, the state, the reason they're there, and whether there's an emergency. Laws and procedures can vary by jurisdiction, and emergency situations can change everything fast. But in many ordinary situations, a knock at the door is still just that, a knock at the door, and that distinction matters more than most people realize. There's a type of encounter often described as a knock and talk. In simple terms, officers knock, ask to speak, and may ask for information or permission to come in. That kind of encounter can be lawful, but it's also one of the easiest moments for a person to give away control without even noticing it. Not by committing a crime, by consenting, by oversharing, by inviting officers inside, by trying too hard to look innocent. That's why Daniel's first real job is not to win the conversation. It's to avoid making the situation bigger than it already is. So after he says, "I'm not answering questions without a lawyer," what happens next? Maybe the officer says, "If you didn't do anything wrong, then why not just talk to us?" That question is incredibly effective because it hits people right in the middle of their fear. Nobody wants to look suspicious. Nobody wants to seem rude. Nobody wants to turn a simple encounter into a confrontation. But this is where calm matters more than cleverness. Daniel doesn't debate. He doesn't lecture the officers about the Constitution. He doesn't puff up his chest and act like he's starring in a courtroom movie. He simply repeats the boundary. In plain English, "I'm not answering questions without a lawyer." Then he listens. That part is underrated. People think asserting a right means turning the volume up. Usually it means turning your own words down. Now, if officers have a warrant, that changes the landscape. If they have a real warrant signed by a judge, this is no longer just a casual doorstep conversation. At that point, the smart move is not physical resistance, not arguing at the threshold, and not trying to outlawyer the scene from your porch. You can ask to see the warrant, you can pay attention, you can stay calm. And even then, talking your way through the encounter is usually not what protects you. Silence often protects you better than improvisation. That may sound counterintuitive, especially to people who have spent their whole lives believing that innocent people should simply clear things up, but real life is messy. Stress scrambles memory, people guess at times, they mix up details, they over-explain harmless behavior in ways that suddenly sound strange. They answer questions they didn't need to answer, then feel stuck defending those answers later. An officer says, "Where were you around 6?" And suddenly an innocent person is mentally flipping through the day, trying to sound precise while also sounding relaxed. Then they say, "I think I got back around 6. Maybe 6:15. Later, a camera, a receipt, or a phone record shows 5:42. Now the story changed, even though the person was simply nervous and estimating. That's how ordinary people create problems for themselves without ever meaning to. About halfway through this kind of story, many viewers start asking the natural question, what if the police really are there for something important? What if someone made a serious accusation? What if the officers say they just need to clear something up? That's exactly why the one phrase matters. It is not a magic spell. It will not make officers vanish. It will not solve every situation. It will not protect someone from lawful action if officers already have the authority to act. But it does something powerful and practical. It stops you from becoming the main source of evidence against yourself through panic and loose conversation. And if you've ever wondered how you'd respond in that moment, think about it now, before you're standing barefoot in your hallway with your pulse racing. Because preparation is a lot easier in a calm room than in a live encounter. If you value practical, real-world stories like this, subscribe, because most people don't think about these moments until they're already in one. Back on Daniel's porch, the officers try a different approach. We're just trying to understand what happened. Again, that sounds harmless, and sometimes it may be, but the problem is not whether the sentence sounds harmless. The problem is that Daniel still does not know what happened means. Was there a complaint from a neighbor? A report involving his car? A misunderstanding involving someone who resembles him? A call claiming someone was yelling? A wellness concern from a family member? A report that is false, exaggerated, mistaken, or missing half the context? Until Daniel knows exactly what this is, his explanations are shots in the dark. So he avoids the instinct to fill the silence. He says, "I'm not answering questions without a lawyer." Notice what he is not doing. He is not insulting the officers. He is not slamming the door in a dramatic way. He is not daring them to arrest him. He is not turning a tense moment into a personal standoff. He is using a short, repeatable sentence that keeps him from talking too much while staying respectful. That balance matters. A lot of bad advice online pushes people toward performance. It teaches attitude instead of discipline. It teaches people to say provocative things because those clips get views. But real encounters are not content. They are not a game. The goal is not to win. The goal is to get through it safely and without making it worse. That means calm voice, no sudden movements, no reaching around out of sight, no hostile body language, no volunteering consent you don't mean to give, no casual "sure, come in" just because you feel awkward, and no long, emotional speeches about how unfair this is. Just the line, "I'm not answering questions without a lawyer," and if the officers leave, then Daniel has done exactly what he needed to do. If they come back later with more formal process, he handles that with legal advice instead of porch improvisation. If the whole thing was a weak complaint, a bad tip, or a misunderstanding that goes nowhere, then his restraint may have saved him from creating a bigger issue with his own mouth, and that's one of the most important lessons in these encounters. Not every threat looks like force. Sometimes the real danger is conversation under stress. Now, to be responsible about this, there are limits to any simple rule. Emergencies exist. Welfare checks exist. Domestic violence calls can be volatile. Mental health situations can be sensitive. If there's an immediate danger to someone, police may act differently than they would in an ordinary voluntary conversation. And again, rules can differ depending on state law, local procedure, and the exact facts officers are responding to. But those exceptions are exactly why vague confidence is dangerous. People hear one viral tip online and think it applies to every doorstep encounter in America. It doesn't. What does stay useful, though, is the core principle. Don't let fear turn you into the investigator against yourself. Daniel didn't know who called. He didn't know what was reported. He didn't know whether the officers had good information, bad information, or almost no information at all. What he did know was this. Once words leave his mouth, he can't take them back. And that's what separates calm awareness from panic. By the end of the night, Daniel is still shaken. Most people would be, but he also realizes something important. The encounter felt dangerous not because there was shouting or violence, but because it began with uncertainty, a vague accusation, a rush of adrenaline, a social pressure to explain yourself. Right now, that is the trap. So the practical takeaway is simple. If police knock and say, "We got a call about you," do not assume you can fix the situation by talking more. Do not assume innocence automatically protects you from saying something inaccurate, unnecessary, or damaging. Do not confuse politeness with surrendering control. Stay calm, be respectful. Do not escalate. If officers have lawful authority, don't physically interfere. But if they are asking questions and you do not have a lawyer present, the phrase worth remembering is this: I'm not answering questions without a lawyer. Short, clear, repeatable. Because in a stressful moment, you do not need the perfect speech. You need a sentence that keeps a vague encounter from becoming your worst conversation. And that's really the bigger lesson here. Knowing your rights is not about acting fearless. It's about staying disciplined when fear shows up anyway. It's about understanding that a calm boundary can do more for you than 10 minutes of nervous explanation ever will. So ask yourself honestly. If that knock came tonight, would you recognize the difference between being questioned and being pressured into talking? Most people wouldn't. At least not until it was too late. That's why these moments are worth thinking through now quietly, clearly, before the knock ever comes.